Hello and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler. I work at the NCI in the Center for Cancer Training. On Inside Cancer Careers, we explore all the different ways that people join the fight against disease and hear their stories. Today, we're talking to Dr. Peng Zhang, a computational scientist at NCI's Center for Cancer Research, who is focused on using big data to understand how cancer can become resistant to immunotherapy and overcoming it. After the break, we are speaking to Dr. Emily Roberts of Personal Finance for PhDs. She joins us to talk about how to make things work financially during grad school and postdoc years. Then, stay tuned to hear recommendations for interesting things from our guests and learn how you can take your turn. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Peng Zhang, a Stadman investigator in the NCI's Cancer Data Science Laboratory, where he leads the section on computational cancer immunology to the show. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver, for the introduction.
It's a great time in the history of cancer research, with the explosion of knowledge about many cancers leading to the development of a good number of new therapy approaches. But in many cases, resistance arises to these new therapies, and we're learning resistance itself may be mediated by many different mechanisms, so making it very hard to predict the response to a treatment and its durability. How can a computational scientist like yourself address this challenge?
Yeah, Oliver, this is a really great question. As you know, for almost any type of effective therapy, in most cases, I would say more than 70% cases for any therapy, resistance will eventually come in one day. It's really a bottleneck of the entire field. And a unique angle from our data scientists is that we utilize the large amount of clinical data from patients to let the patient's data tell us what is going on under their resistance. The cause for resistance could be really complicated, right? One clinical trial, one cohort of patients may only tell you part of the story because it's so complicated. However, if you aggregate a lot of data sets from different centers, from different studies, and really look at the behavior of tumors when developing resistance in a really big data manner, you can see lots of new mechanisms and surprise. This is a unique advantage of us as a data scientist because we can utilize the big data-driven approach to aggregate lots of resources from different publications, from different centers to get a holistic whole view of the resistance process, and then develop some hypotheses and get some later experimental validation. So in short, I think our data science's advantage in this process is the big data, the size.
So what kind of data are you analyzing? Clinical data, but also biological data of the tumors?
Yes. So right now, tumor sequencing is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So there are lots of RNA sequencing, whole exome sequencing to tell you the RNA level, the DNA somatic mutations, and also epigenetic sequencing tell you the epigenetic modification. So we analyze all kinds of sequencing data, transcriptomic data from different studies, paired with the patient clinical outcomes.
And you're focused on immunotherapy, which of course is a particularly exciting area right now. You've got checkpoint blockades, you've got CAR T cells, now personalized mRNA vaccines.
Yes.
What are the challenges of these approaches, and how does your work specifically address them?
Yeah, so first of all, immunotherapy indeed brings breakthrough, but remember, for most current immunotherapies, in most solid tumor types, more than 2/3 of the patients will not respond to the treatment. So which means for the majority of the patients, still immunotherapy does not really bring any help to them. And if you look at the rule of nature, any mechanism you develop in biology or in the human body must have one or two counter mechanisms to stop that. For any kind of mechanism, including immunological process or any kind of other process. The same for immunology. Any anti-tumor or anti-pathogen immune response process must have two or even more counter mechanisms to stop that through the evolution, which means that tumors have so many options to go against any immunotherapy we deliver against them, right? Because nature, through the evolution, there are so many things to just come out.
So these counter mechanisms, they are normally in a healthy individual, they balance each other out to prevent runaway processes.
Exactly. And this is the nature product of evolution. Because in evolution, there's no single mechanism can overcome all other mechanisms. There's always something that has to counter it.
So that's already, it strikes me as incredibly complicated. The immune system is itself complicated. But then we also recognize that the tumor is really a complex community, almost a tissue in itself or an organ in itself, right, with all kinds of cellular components in it.
Yeah.
How do you pull and tease that apart?
Yeah, like the sequencing technologies nowadays are becoming so powerful, right? Through like at least the whole exome sequencing, you can see lots of mutations. RNA sequencing, you can roughly infer what cell populations are in the tumor. And also like spatial sequencing are becoming more and more affordable. Right now, you can even know the molecular spatial structure of the tumors. So which means with the advance of our technologies, understanding the tumor structure will be becoming easier and easier. So I would say that eventually we should be able to get a pretty reasonable view of the tumor structure and understand how does the tumor counteract against the immune response.
How does the structural three-dimensional composition of the tumor, how will you learn from looking at that, how the immune activities are overcome or the resistance arises?
Yeah, like the most conventional histopathology staining, like H&E staining, is a very conventional, commonly used approach, right? You just look at texture, look at the morphology, and you can infer what type of cells roughly through the cell morphology. This is a pretty cheap assay, like several dollars for a tumor sample. And then if you want to know more of the subtype of the cells in the tumor, like multiplex immunofluorescence of 6 or 7 proteins are becoming more and more possible right now. And this could already tell you a lot. If there are some like immunosuppressive cells, what could they come from? What could be their lineage? Like multiplex immunofluorescence could already tell you a lot. And then here comes with our recent new technologies, spatial transcriptomics, codex spatial proteomics of 40 protein markers, or maybe RNA sequencing on a genome scale. However, these technologies are still too expensive from clinical applications right now. But at least for research, they greatly expand our structure view of the tumor.
So help me understand how this knowledge will then allow you to support therapies or to avoid resistance or overcome resistance.
Yeah.
I imagine there's three-dimensional tumors. There's immune cells in there. There's tumor cells. There's all kinds of stromal cells. Now you have detailed transcriptomic and mutational and epigenetic information about all these different cells. How does that then transform into something that you can do in the clinic? So
like when tumor is finding a mechanism to go against the immune attack, typically this mechanism will not happen all across the tumor. It will only happen at a certain region, more frequently at the border between tumor and the immune section, because you will only need like the soldiers to fight in the front line, right? So which means conventionally, if you sequence the whole tumor, you will really dilute the signal of the key mechanism at the front line. This is why the current spatial technologies is very useful, because it can help you to pinpoint on the most critical region and have detailed resolution of what is going on molecularly there.
Am I right in thinking that you're actually trying to sort of see the resistance arising in that zone that you described, the interface?
Yeah, a very specific zone, and really focus your sequencing power on the most important zone.
Interesting. So you're a computer engineer, computer scientist by training. I have two questions. How did you become interested in the work that you're doing today? And how, as a computer scientist, a computer engineer, do you approach it? Do you approach it differently, do you think, than if you had trained as a biologist primarily?
Yeah. So like initially when I came to USA for graduate school study, my major was computer graphics. Because Princeton University, my PhD school, has a terrific computer graphics program. Most students graduating from Princeton computer graphics program will join Pixar, like Snapchat, like to make computer games, movies, more for entertainment. To be honest, I could be biased. I think, depends what is the utility of computer games to our young generation. And then at that time, one of my most respected people, my flute teacher, died of brain tumors. I learned so much from him, both music and also on being a good person. And, like he is kind of like my father kind of role.
Yes.
And for such a people I deeply respect, suddenly died of brain tumor within 3 months.
Wow.
It's really big shock to me, because like 3 months before, I can see he seems to be quite normal, but suddenly he started to respond very slowly if I ask him a question, and then after 90 days, he died.
Wow.
Like this is a really deep shock to me because some people you really respect like leave you, right? Like in a short amount of time.
Of course.
And then, at that time, I just keep open-minded. A good thing about Princeton is it does give graduate students lots of flexibilities if you suddenly become interested in some other aspect. Because the school gave everyone really safe guard financially. So you have some freedom to explore around in the graduate school. And then, after many years, I realized that cancer research is not about science. It's not only about science. It's more about human emotion. It's about to do something to let the people you love, the people you respect, could have a better life, or could at least live a few months longer.
Yes.
To enjoy time with its family members. Then gradually, I just found that cancer research is a really mixture of enjoying scientific exploration, scientific endeavor, and also doing something to help our basic human emotions. So this is why you eventually decide to switch from computer graphics to like bioinformatics with some focus on cancer-related applications.
I can see that. It's a deeply motivating experience. And obviously, we're excited to have people with your skill set and expertise in the world of cancer. So you bring that computer engineering expert.
Yeah. But Olivier,
yes,
I also mentioned one important thing here. I enjoy a lot in this process, but also I somehow, not only me, also suffer a lot in this process. Because to be honest, if you look at the industry, the computer and IT industry in US and in other part of the world are really booming a lot.
Yes.
Which means if I stay in computer science, join Pixar or join those big IT companies, the pay is so high. The pay is just so high. You know what I mean? And
yes.
To be honest, I think that it's much easier to get an extremely high pay to stay in computer science than going to biology and cancer research. Unfortunately, this is the truth. So I would say that going this path, from a computer to stay in computer science, is not really kind of benefits young people from the financial point of view. And I'm still thinking very hard of how to resolve this or balance this through some mechanism. But I think this is a major difficulty, especially at NCI. When we want to recruit computational postdocs, we are competing with Amazon close to us. They are paying something that is even comparable to my boss at NCI.
Yes.
So then it's so hard to compete for talented young people to join our endeavor nowadays. So I think this could cause attention of our higher leadership, or maybe people around us could think about some creative solutions.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think that is a real challenge because we need people with that talent, but we are competing with a very active private sector.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as a computer scientist, how do you think your approach to the biological problem of cancer is perhaps different from that of someone like myself who trained as a biologist?
Yeah, this is really a personal viewpoint. In my just a personal case, I think a key difference is the way we develop hypotheses, right? Because fundamentally, biology is a hypothesis-driven science. We need to find a hypothesis first. As a computer scientist, we have a little bit of luxury to look at lots of data from human clinics and see clinically what are the biggest correlative of a patient clinical outcome at worst event, and through some more complicated models, what are potential regulators. So which means that I think that we do have a big advantage of developing some better hypotheses through analyzing a large amount of human genetics data. However, our disadvantage is because we are trained as computer scientists, sometimes we may not really know the biology deep enough. So we could focus on something which may not be really useful at the very beginning. This is why, personally, I started doing biology experiments since the fourth year of my PhD study and spent many years to catch up biology knowledge. So I would say a computer scientist, if you want to do cancer research, should take a considerable amount of time to learn biology. Otherwise, we could focus on something not so useful.
Yeah, and you continued your journey after Princeton at Dana-Farber and the Harvard School of Public Health, right? So presumably that you were steeped there in cancer biology. Why the Harvard School of Public Health? Did you do public health research?
Oh, this is just a naming issue because Dana-Farber Cancer Institute is an affiliate of Harvard University, and our department is affiliated under the School of Public Health.
Oh.
And all other departments are affiliated under the medical school, but it's not really related with public health. It's just a affiliation issue.
I understand. So you focus there then on the kind of detailed molecular analysis of cancers that you're now combining with your computation.
Yes.
And I believe you're using AI, of course, in your work as well, right? I mean, AI is exploding all around us. Even non-computational people like myself can't avoid noticing it these days. How are you using it?
Yeah, so in biology, lots of data does not really have obvious dimensions, right? For example, for gene expression, it's easy. The dimension is gene expression. Just look at the readout from different genes. But for lots of data type, like histopathology, image, or protein or spatial transcriptomic data, what you get is both the molecular marker and the spatial structure information. It's just impossible for human eyes to analyze those kind of data. This is why you have to use AI to somehow model this data more dimensional space to analyze what is the differential feature. So I would say that for undimensional and spatial structure data, that lots of new biology technologies are generating right now. AI is a tool you have to utilize.
So you received a K99R00 award while you were a postdoc, right?
Yeah.
And how did that impact your next step? You came to the NCI, obviously. So
yeah. So I gave up my K99 because if I want to join NCI, I have to give up my K99, right?
Yes.
At NIH. I think advantage is that after I get to the K99, lots of schools invite me to go for faculty interview. So, lots of a free flight and dinner and talk with lots of people around. It's really kind of an enjoyment. Even though eventually I did not really use the K99. I do think the K99 bring me a really good thing directly, which means that I get lots of invited talk and publicize my research profile. Otherwise, as a young faculty, or as young people, it will take some time for me to really get lots of invitations.
Right. So you came to NCI. What made you decide that the NCI's intramural research program was the right place for you?
It's about people. I remember I met with my current boss, Ethan Rupin, or I would say current mentor, like my lab chief, at the AACR conference in 2018. After talking with Ethan for 10 minutes, I immediately decided that this is the one I want to work with. I want him to be my mentor and my boss in the future. So it's more about the charisma and also the dynamic feeling that I talk with my current mentor, Ethan Rubin. This is the number one reason. And the second reason is that I interviewed at NCI. I talk with so many people here. I really love my scientific discussions with NCI people and NIH people. The third reason, and also a very important reason, is the sustainability of scientific research. If I stay in a medical school, I need to probably write grants all day long. How can I focus on research ideas that needs a little bit more time, right? So, for example, at Princeton, Andrew Wells could spend the decades of years to focus on proving the formulas, the congestion, because he has financial stability and safety. The counterpart in biology, the only place I find with this safety is NCI. So this institute just gave me some safety that I can take a risk and work on some long run things. Otherwise, in other private institutions who are also very great, I cannot really probably afford to focus on some long-term project without just keep writing grants.
Yeah, the NCI's or NIH's program, intramural program, is designed exactly for that, right?
Yeah.
Longer term, higher risk projects with less cycle. That's fantastic. So what was it like to start your own research group?
Yeah, to be honest, at the very beginning, it's not so much different from being a postdoc. Maybe I just become a super postdoc doing research by myself because at the very beginning, I'm just postdoc by myself. And then COVID-19 came, right? Then it's very hard for me to recruit people because for me, as a young PI, mostly I still recruit people from China, from my Chinese background. But then when COVID came with the travel ban, I cannot recruit people from China. So just myself, still as a single postdoc. And gradually I have a postdoc and one student. So I mentor them, but I still need to do a quite portion of the programming work by myself and also mentor them to somehow do the work together with. It's not really like my postdoc mentor, she can somehow more depend on us on independent. I have to closely work with my initial trainees. They are my colleagues, my benchmate, just kind of work. And until recently, after the COVID is gone, I can get more people in the lab. Then gradually my focus switched from programming and working as a colleague more to the mentor and maybe manager, especially how to manage people. Like this, but the transition only happened recently.
Yeah, and you were recruited as part of the Stadman program.
Yeah.
What is that program?
Yeah, this program is like, I guess is, like an NIH institutional-wide kind of umbrella program to recruit promising young faculties, give a kind of a guarantee of a certain amount of resource, make sure we can totally focus on scientific research without worrying about the money issue. So basically, I think this is really unique setting, at least I can find in US, that could really give young people totally scientific and budget safety to focus on some long-term things, even from the very beginning.
So help us understand what the next months or years for your research program look like. What are you excited about?
Yeah, so currently I'm really excited about using big data approach to find new secretion proteins underlying the cancer immunotherapy resistance. Because recently, we have collected lots of human clinical data from different clinical trials that other people published, and also from our collaborators. And after we systematically examine this large body of human clinical outcome data under cancer immunotherapy trials, we really found that a group of secreted proteins with really less known functions are really top indicators of either bad or good immunotherapy outcome. And also traditionally, secretion protein studies is a blind spot for genetic screening approach. Because genetic screening cannot study secretion proteins, all neighbor cells are still sending out a signal. So mutagenesis on one cell is just tell you nothing in the microenvironment setting. This is why I'm so excited about this blind spot of traditional genetics approach, but really gave a computational data-driven approach some unique advantage. So currently we are using data integration, computational modeling, and also mouse models to study to identify new secreted proteins driving the cancer immunotherapy response and resistance, and with some quite promising initial result. Find some new secreted proteins that has really unknown functions, but really have a dramatic effect in driving the cancer immunotherapy response.
So those proteins might be points of future intervention.
Yes, because any secreted proteins could be a drug by itself with some kind of engineer, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's your advice you're giving to early career scientists, maybe even computational scientists like yourself who might be interested in cancer? What advice are you giving them?
Yeah, maybe my advice is more specific to computational scientists. Like the first advice, only do science if you are really enthusiastic about it. Otherwise, for computational scientists, just don't do it. Most time, you will probably, for people who are not really sure about science, what will end up is they do maybe 1 or 2 years science research, then just go to industry. Because for the industry market is booming so much. So I think that otherwise, 1 or 2 years, then why bother just to join at the very beginning, right? And also for the PI, it's unfair to waste the PI 1 or 2 years kind of funding, and then see the postdoc just leave to industry. And if you are really enthusiastic about science and really want to use your knowledge to change people's life, to make sure your beloved people or other people's beloved people could have a few more months or survival time to enjoy family time, or eventually have the disease cured, then if this is your inner drive, then do cancer research with your computational expertise. But for people who don't really have this inner drive to serve for the human being's emotion, I didn't consider about it. Maybe industry sector is a really good option. And then, then for people who decide to do the research, my second advice is just slow down. Don't be too eager to publish or get a paper or find a position. Scientific research is not easy. 99% they are getting failures or imperfect results. You really need to slow down to somehow have a kind of a smooth, to somehow enjoy the process of doing scientific research with your colleagues. And then under this mode, maybe it's even quicker in the long run to get a good research work published and establish your signature work in the field.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about your work and your story and sharing this advice with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver.
The NCI recently launched a new online seminar series. Here to tell us more is Naz Zahir, the director of the Cancer Training Branch.
Yes, we launched the NCI Rising Scholars Cancer Research Seminar Series in January to highlight the research and contributions made by NCI-supported postdoctoral fellows and early career investigators at NCI laboratories and NCI-funded institutions nationwide. The talks are every month on the third Thursday, and you can see them and register for them on the NCI website. There will be a link in the show notes, or you can search for NCI Rising Scholars.
That sounds great. What kind of topics are other speakers covering?
We have a broad range of topics, pretty much any kind of cancer research. We have had basic science topics, clinical research, health disparities, cancer prevention, immunology, and many more. Each talk is related to a recent publication by the presenter, and there is plenty of time for Q&A.
What if you missed a talk?
We post a recording of the presentation a few days after the talk, along with a transcript and captions, so you can always catch the talks at your convenience.
Thanks, Naz. Check out NCI's Rising Scholar Seminar Series if you're interested in some great research that's increasing knowledge right now. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Emily Roberts. Dr. Roberts obtained her doctorate in biomedical engineering from Duke University in 2014, but now she's focused on providing financial advice to early career scientists. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Emily, I'm interested. How did you first get the science bug?
Oh, I tough one. So I remember when I was in, let's say, middle school, even into high school, I always was a good academic performer across a lot of subject areas. So I was, on an advanced math track, for example, probably like many of your listeners, but I also really loved reading and writing and so forth. And I had the opportunity in high school to attend a magnet high school that was science and technology focused. And I remember that was actually a tough decision for me. I mean, I ended up going there, but my alternative, if I hadn't gone there, was an international baccalaureate program at my base high school. And so I was like, torn between these two worlds, But I decided to go kind of the science and tech track. And it was in high school that I fell in love with physics, which is what I ended up majoring in college. And so it was really, I think, during high school, I got, a little bit pushed in that direction by the environment that I was in. And I really loved astronomy and astrophysics and so forth. And I actually decided to go to Harvey Mudd College for my undergraduate degree, which if your listeners are not familiar with it, its tagline is the Liberal Arts College of Engineering. So it's a liberal arts education, but the only majors that are offered are engineering and sciences. And so I thought that was a great balance for me of still being able to have these different elements in my life, still being able to pursue some humanities studies, social sciences and so forth, as well as being able to major in physics at an excellent institution. So yeah, that's I've always had sort of a foot or an interest in all kinds of different academic subject areas.
Interesting. And then you chose biomedical engineering for your PhD.
Yeah. So this might speak to I've never settled in one area for very long. So yes, I did physics in my undergraduate and I liked biology, but I hadn't had a really good biology background in high school. And so it wasn't until I got to college that I got more biology classes and decided, I'm really interested in this too. And so I kind of shifted from physics to biophysics and then into biomedical engineering. And honestly, I actually ended up picking biomedical engineering. I was very torn again. My passion would have been to study astrobiology for my graduate degree. Not an area I know a ton about, but I was reading books about it. I tried to take some courses at the undergraduate level, and I was just, this is my passion. But I was also very practical, and I realized that it would be difficult to get funding in that area, and it would be difficult. The career options are very limited. And so I ended up choosing biomedical engineering, which I was also very interested in. But because the career prospects on the other side of that degree were much more solid. And yeah, so I don't necessarily regret doing my PhD or whatever, but there's always that path not taken of the subject matter I didn't end up studying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many areas of interest. It's always difficult to choose. But then I understand that you chose not to stay in science primarily, but you pivoted to a new career. Tell us about that and how did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I should mention that in between my undergraduate and graduate degrees, I did a 1-year postbac fellowship at the NIH.
Oh.
I was in IRTA for a year.
Okay.
Great experience. And then when I started graduate school, I'm sure so many others, I was very optimistic, wide-eyed. And a couple years into that, I was getting pretty burned out on the research track, was not enjoying myself as much as I had been in the earlier years. And I did a big kind of career reevaluation sort of in my third year, I would say, of my PhD, and was really trying to decide, should I just leave with a master's? Should I finish? What are my career options? What am I really wanting to pursue here? And I decided that I did have a few career options I was quite interested in that were, it depends on what term you use, right? Alternative careers, outside of academia, these kinds of things. I knew I didn't want to stay in academia. But there were some things I was interested in terms of other careers that still required the PhD, or the PhD would be very useful as a credential. And so I decided to finish the PhD kind of for that reason. And then, as we'll talk about in a minute, ended up pivoting completely my subject matter again. But I still find the PhD credential and experience that I had to be very useful in my current career, even though I'm not using my specific research area.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the PhD, you learn a lot about how to research things in depth, how to assemble information, study data, and all those kinds of things. I'd like to go dig a little deeper in what you just told us. So you spent some time kind of doing a survey of what you could do in your career. How did you tackle that?
So I was really, really fortunate that the university I attended, Duke, has a really robust support area in terms of professional development and career services and so forth. I don't actually know right now, but it did at that time. And I think it was really kind of one of the forerunners in providing those kinds of services to the PhD population, not just, the undergraduates and the master's students and so forth. So I really utilized the services and the exercises and the programs that they were offering. Like I was one of those like frequent flyers, at those like professional development events. So I did that a lot in about my third year of graduate school. And I, did like the strengths inventory. I did those tests and all these things and was just, trying to figure out what I wanted. I did identify, as I said, a few careers that I was interested in. The main one that I actually worked in for a tiny bit after my PhD was science policy.
Interesting. So I think you're referring to the Strength Finders methodology, which kind of takes a look at your abilities and interests and tries to match you to domains of work, I guess, is one way of putting it. Interesting. So I think a lot of our listeners probably have similar resources on at their institutions, and I guess engaging with them is a good thing. All right. So where did you end up and why specifically there?
Yes. Okay. So now we have to go back again to this period of time right after I finished undergrad, when I was doing my postbac and then when I started graduate school. So no shade to my parents, but I was never really explicitly taught anything about money when I was growing up. I mean, we all absorb things about money from our environments, the attitudes and so forth about it, but they were not overtly teaching me anything like about budgeting or credit cards or retirement accounts or any of those kinds of things. And so once I graduated from college and I started this postbac, I knew I was going to be receiving a stipend. If I remember correctly, it was about $24,000 a year. This was like 2007. And I was living, right outside DC. And so this I knew because I'm actually from the DC area, from the Virginia side. I knew that this is a high cost of living area and that $24,000 per year was going to be challenging. And so I sort of started to undertake a self-study in personal finance just to figure out, well, how am I going to survive on this level of income in this certain, cost of living area? And then further than that, like, how do I thrive? Like, what are the adulting things that I am supposed to be doing with my money? And can I manage to do any of those things as a postbac fellow and then as a graduate student? So what started off, around 2007, 2008, as like reading books about personal finance turned into, if you remember this time period, we're into the Great Recession, into like reading blogs about personal finance. There was a huge boom in the personal finance blogosphere. And so I was consuming a lot of that content. And then about midway through graduate school, I realized that nobody was like, not nobody, but there was very little content in terms of these blogosphere being produced about the graduate student experience, like graduate students on stipends experience in terms of the finances. And so I started blogging about my own finances. And in that was also from time to time discussing kind of grad student specific issues like, can I use a Roth IRA, or like what's going on with my taxes, like these sort of weird technical things. And I realized after a few years of doing this sort of towards the end of graduate school that I was looking at, the search traffic that my blog got. I had a very small blog, but like the search traffic that I would get, these posts that I was writing about grad student specific issues were getting all this search traffic in comparison to my other stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, like this content is needed. And there's not really anyone like teaching or talking about this, at least at a national level. And so that was one of the early clues for me that I was interested in this area, but also that it was an area of need among my peer group.
So how did that need manifest? What information were your early readers of your blog looking for?
Yeah, as I said, my post, I think it was titled The Bane of the Graduate Student's Roth IRA. That was definitely the top post that was getting traffic on that particular blog. So at that time, you could not contribute non-W-2 fellowship income to an IRA. That was not considered taxable compensation. That law has since changed. But this was an area that was not well understood. And a lot of people were contributing to IRAs without realizing that they didn't have the proper income to be able to do so. And so my, writing about that and just reading the text and like interpreting what the tax code was saying was helpful to them in understanding, maybe if their brokerage firm or, the IRS sent something back, said, oh, actually, this is not proper. You can't do this, whatever. They found some information. And then I was helping to kind of explain and interpret that to them. So that crossover actually of like investing and taxes, those are like my two favorite personal finance subject areas. So I actually love that it was at the crossover point between those two.
Yeah, you clearly have a passion for this stuff. So just to be the acronym police, IRA is?
Individual retirement arrangement. So an IRA is the type of tax advantage retirement account that you can open independent of your workplace. So like your workplace might offer, well, not as a graduate student, but later on might offer a 401k or a 403b or a 457. We've probably all heard these kinds of acronyms floating around. But the one that you can get that's independent, that does not depend on your university or your employer or whatever, is the IRA, the individual retirement arrangement.
And the Roth is a subtype of that, correct?
Yes. So there's two flavors of IRAs, the traditional, the type that came first, and the Roth. And without necessarily going into the details, the Roth is generally preferred by people with lower incomes like graduate students and postdocs.
Yeah, but I'm not asking you to give tax advice here on the podcast, but just trying to make sure our listeners sort of understand what you're sharing with them. So, okay, so you had this experience. Let me get this right. You were still in graduate school, but you were developing this interest and passion and you were blogging about that. Is that correct?
That's correct. I started my first blog in about 2011. That's about midway through my PhD. The other thing that happened that sort of made me realize that this information was needed actually is a good faith effort that was undertaken by Duke, which was that they had put on some seminars. One was maybe about investing. There were a couple on taxes. I actually ultimately, as through a volunteer position, became involved in like setting up these kinds of events with like local, CPAs and like wealth advisors and so forth. But what I was realizing is that despite our best efforts from the university side, bringing in these, licensed, credentialed, very capable professionals to do these kinds of teaching events was not a great fit because the clients that they typically served were totally out of step with the current reality of the graduate students and postdocs that they were speaking to. And so they, maybe like on the tax side, they might be accustomed to preparing the tax returns of, high income earning parents of college students. And so then they think they know something about grad student taxes, which are kind of a whole different beast. So they knew a little bit, but not quite enough to make the material tailored and fit the best for that particular audience. On the investment side, they were talking about 401ks. And I was like, I have a Roth IRA over here. Like, what do I do with that? So I just realized that, because of the client mismatch, those were not the best kinds of people to be teaching this material. And frankly, someone from their own peer group, me, with that self-knowledge and that, reading and so forth that I was doing was quite capable of teaching this material.
So a real gap, I guess, in what was being offered and what was being talked about, despite Duke's best efforts here. Yeah.
And again, I want to commend Duke for even trying to do anything in that area because so many universities don't and didn't at that time. But I could do a little better. And so actually, I, again, thank you, Tim, for giving me the opportunity to give my first speaking engagement on this subject, which was after I defended. I was sticking around Durham because my husband, who also defended at the same time, was transitioning to a postdoc position in his same PhD advisor's lab. But my advisor left the university and I was like, whoops, I don't have a job anymore. And so I was kind of kicking around, not sure what I was doing. And, looking for some work opportunities. And in that time, I was like, hey, why don't I just develop a seminar on everything I think a graduate student, on a stipend needs to know about personal finance. And I gave that as a volunteer thing through the group that I had been working with for a couple of years there at Duke. And I just loved it. I had so much fun developing the material, delivering the engagement, answering people's questions. And I was like, how do I make that my job? That was so much fun. And so that was kind of what launched the business Personal Finance for PhDs out of, those sort of side hustle hobby type pursuits that I had been doing earlier.
Yeah, so you had a really good chance to kind of market test what you were offering. But I would guess that it would have still taken some courage to take that leap into, okay, I'm now going to start my own consulting business, if that's the right way to put it. Is that true? Did you feel courageous or did it just seem obvious to you?
So I am not really a risk taker. So this was a big risk to be doing with my career. And so there are a couple things that contributed to me being able to take that risk at that time. By the way, I don't call what I do consulting or advice giving.
Oh,
I call it financial education.
okay.
Because I don't have a CPA, I'm not a CFP. No, it's totally fine. It's like everybody gets confused about this. So I just want to be, people are always like, oh, you're a consultant, right? And like, well, the business is similar to a consultancy, but what I do is not consulting.
Got it.
So anyway, but yes, there are a couple things at that time. So one was that, as I mentioned, my husband had a job and we had joint finances. And so, while not lovely living, two people on a postdoc salary, it was okay. And I had a side hustle. Like I was bringing in some degree of income, right? And so that was okay at that time for a little while, because the other part of this picture is that my husband and we got married about halfway through graduate school. We were both kind of aligned on this. And so we were both working on our personal finances. I mentioned earlier, I was doing a lot of learning about it, but I was also doing a lot of application, right? Saving up the emergency fund, starting to do the investments like in Roth IRAs, so forth, these kinds of things, paying off debt. And so because we had been doing that for this 7 years, right, between when we both graduated from college in 2007 and then, 2014, we had quite a, decent nest egg built up by that time. And so that gave us both some confidence that it was okay to take some risk in our careers that we might not have been able to do had we not had that kind of financial safety net in place. So not only did I eventually start my business, which certainly at first did not earn what I would have been earning if I had gotten a standard type job. But my husband also, not a career risk taker, but he was able to go to a startup that actually was a really, really great fit for his PhD work. And he would not have considered a job like that if we didn't have that financial security that we had generated, on our personal balance sheets, because we obviously were not necessarily thinking it was going to come from in my case, myself, my own employer. In his case, a 12-person company that he went to in, I guess it would have been like about 2015.
Interesting. So now we're almost 10 years later, and you've obviously not only continued in this work, but expanded it significantly, is my understanding. So what is the state of your activities now?
It's so varied. I'm really grateful for that. So at the beginning, I was sort of billing myself as like a professional public speaker on this topic of personal finance for this particular audience of graduate students and postdocs. And that has remained something that I continue to do. But now, and things changed with the pandemic, obviously. I was traveling, some before then, and then that was not an option anymore. So the business has had to shift a bit over time. So I've added a lot of different types of offerings. Right now, what I'm really excited about, so I still do the live speaking, whether it's webinars or in person. But what I'm really excited about now is more of like a flipped classroom type model of content that I've developed. So I've pre-recorded a lot of the various areas that I teach, chiefly taxes, but also in some other areas. And so what I do, I'll just give you an example for the tax workshops that I offer during tax season, which we're recording this in April, so that just ended. It's heavy on my mind. So I pre-record all this teaching about how to generate your tax return correctly as a graduate student or postdoc. This year, I actually expanded to offering it to non-residents as well as U.S. citizens and residents. So I pre-record all these videos. I give the slides. I give the text. It's like maybe 2 hours of content, something like that, if you were to watch it straight through. Also worksheets to help people keep things straight. So they have all this pre-recorded content. I like this because they can access it at any point during tax season, right? Like some people want to file in January, some people want to file in April. And then I pair that with periodic live Q&A sessions. So I really love this because I get to spend my time creating the teaching material, like creating the slide deck, writing the script, doing it once, or, doing it well. And then I just get to answer people's questions as like the thing that I show up live for, which is so much more fun and exciting to me than presenting, the same material over and over again. I get to present it once, as I said, do it right, and then just answer people's questions. And I love that interaction with people as like part of my job, answering questions, hearing stories from them, hearing how the material has helped them or, what areas they're moving into next. So I have that for the tax area of my business, but also several other areas. And so that's what I'm really excited about, is just like me getting more face time, like answering people's questions instead of just people listening to me talk live.
Makes sense. What's the business model?
I don't know. That's one thing about solopreneurship that is so fun, is like, you don't have to write a business plan at the beginning of this. You just kind of feel out how it goes. But yeah,
Are people paying a subscription to your content or?
Okay. So my main revenue comes from universities.
Oh, okay.
So I really love it when I can get this material in front of graduate students and postdocs without them having to pay for it. So I really want the universities ideally to pay for it on their behalf and offer it as like a free benefit. that's not always possible. And so I do have, for example, for the tax workshops I just mentioned, there is a way for individuals to purchase those through my website, but the vast majority of the revenue comes from the university clients.
And I think you mentioned that you had given this presentation or this workshop at NIH this past year. Is that correct?
Yeah. So NIH was a new client this year. Thank you so much, the Office of Intramural Training and Education. Yeah. So this tax season, so again, we're in April 2023. So for the 2022 tax year, OIT offered all 4 versions of my tax return workshop. So one for postbacks, one for grad students, one for postdocs, all U.S. citizens or residents, and then one for non-residents, all those groups together. And so it was awesome to have that them as a first-time client this year. I was so glad to be able to work with them.
That is fantastic. I know it's something that our postbacks, postdocs, and grad students continues to ask for is help us with taxes. So it's great that happened. So sort of taking a slight pivot, you speak to a lot of folks in their early careers. What are the biggest challenges that grad students, postdocs are facing at the moment in 2023 in terms of financial issues?
It's got to be income versus cost of living. No question. I mean, we've seen this, I don't want to say unprecedented, that's not the right word, but not precedented in a long time degree of inflation going on in our, economy generally. And that has really obviously squeezed people's budgets, and the stipends and salaries have not, some of them have budged, but not enough of them and not enough movement, right, to really keep up with the levels of inflation. So again, great job to those universities and institutes and programs and so forth that have significantly raised the stipends and salaries, but it needs to be more across the board for sure. So I would say income is the main challenge.
So you described a moment ago about your own journey and that together with your husband, how you focused a lot of your energy on improving your own financial health with, I'm going to characterize it as just disciplined measures of paying down debt and savings and things like that. Is that an area you also offer advice in to grad students and postdocs?
For sure. So it's interesting for me, when I have thinking about speaking engagements that I do, I have to serve 2 groups of people, right? I have to serve the people who are paying for me to be there, which is the universities, the clients, and I have to serve the people in the audience, the graduate students and the postdocs. And so I'm probably not talking enough about fixing the income side of the equation as I would like to be in those settings. So tune into my podcast, Personal Finance for PhDs, if you want to hear more about, the income side of the equation, because in those settings, I do talk more about the financial management side of things. So for sure, we talk about budgeting. I have a really budgeting sort of tactic that I used when I was in graduate school that I found really helpful that my audiences are always asking follow-up questions about. They're so interested in it when I teach it. But also, yes, the debt management, the saving the emergency funds and just cash flows, how to use credit cards, all those kinds of things for sure. But I really find that, okay, let's set aside the income problem, which is a major, major problem right now, especially. I do find that my audiences are quite interested in the topic of taxes. I already talked about that so much. And investing, again, my 2 favorite topics. So even though maybe a graduate student or postdoc, some of them are ready to start investing while they're in graduate school, but even if they're not ready, they're still quite interested in learning because they know when they get to that post-PhD, postdoc career job, that investing is going to be part of their lives. They're savvy enough that they already realize they're going to be starting that as soon as possible because they feel this pressure of having lost, some time during their PhD training. So of course, if you can get started investing now, that's awesome. But if you can't right now, then, there's some steps you can take to be ready to do so once you have the income to support it. So I love talking about that area, and the audiences are quite interested in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, investment it's very time driven. So the earlier you start, the better you start. But I'm guessing your observation is that no matter how financially disciplined someone is right now, the income is not sufficient in most parts of the United States, I would guess.
It's so hard to generalize here, because we hear so many anecdotes, and I would love to have more data around this. I actually have a database website called PhDstipends.com that people can go to report their, what they're earning in their graduate positions. There's also a sister website, postdocsalaries.com, for the postdoc, population. So you can get some idea of what people are being paid and compare those to, local cost of living kind of things. But that's not a scientifically generated, survey group. So I would love to see more studies around this, because certainly some people are dramatically underpaid. They're in very precarious positions in graduate school or in their postdocs, whether that's because the income is too low, whether it's because, they have academic year only income, but not summer income, or maybe they have only guaranteed income for 5 years, but the degree is going to take 7, all kinds of different reasons that this can happen. Yet there are others who think that they're being paid fine, well enough that they might, want to do things like investing and paying down debt while they're in graduate school. And of course, a lot of people in the middle who are kind of making it. They're not too stressed, but they're certainly not able to reach any financial goals. And so it's really a kind of a heterogeneous group. And so on my podcast, for example, kind of because people volunteer to come on. So generally speaking, people volunteer to be interviewed who are doing pretty okay with their finances because they feel good about talking about it. And so I have a lot of success stories on the podcast, but those are not representative of what's going on generally with the entire, PhD population. And so, like I said, it's just really heterogeneous. And of course, I'm only talking about the income versus cost of living side of things right now. There's also different family situations, right? So some people may have dependents to support, whether those are children, whether that is, an aging parent, whether they're sending, remittances back to their home countries to support, someone there. So we kind of maybe assume an avatar of a graduate student who's a single young person, but that's definitely not everybody. And some people have other financial responsibilities. And so, yeah, it's kind of all over the map. But I would really, really love to see those people who are being paid the least brought up out of this really poverty level, income that they have to be able to have more financial security. Because frankly, how can we be expected to perform well and succeed with our research, with finishing our degrees, with, publishing the papers when we're not receiving sufficient financial support? When you have that stress of money on your mind, how can you be expected to perform well? And so it's really, I think, in the best interest of the universities to support people better because they're going to get better work out of them in the meantime. And it's also the humane thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that feedback. You've mentioned the podcast a couple of times. So you're in your 14th season. That's impressive.
Not 14 years, just 14 seasons.
Sure.
Because we do about 3 per year.
3 seasons per year. But give us a sort of overview of what kind of topics. You've mentioned you have guests coming on and who talk about their own financial journeys. What else do you cover in the podcast?
The vast majority of the episodes are interviews with, as I said, volunteers. So, hey, if you're a podcast lover, come on my podcast and talk about your finances. So that could be talking about the overall financial journey that they've had, let's say entirely through graduate school, or it could be on more specific topics. Like I recently had a fantastic interview be published from a first year graduate student who talked about, how she selected the graduate schools that she was going to apply to, partially based on the stipends that they offered, how she, evaluated those offer letters. So it's sort of talking about the process of getting into graduate school. Other times I'll have kind of professionals on. So I've interviewed a few, for instance, financial planners, people who do legally give advice on these kinds of things. So I've had some financial planners on if they, focus on academics or on PhDs as part of their core client population. They talk about how those clients are, similar or dissimilar from, general financial planning clients that they might have. And then from time to time, I also do solo episodes where there's a certain area that I really want to teach on for free for everybody. They don't have to come to one of my seminars, just listen to the podcast. So, I mentioned earlier, for example, there was a law change that allowed fellowship income not reported on W-2s to be considered taxable compensation and contributed to an individual retirement arrangement. And so when the Secure Act passed, and that was one of the changes that happened with that law, I devoted an episode, for example, to explaining what was going on with that. So from time to time, there'll be me teaching on things. I teach about taxes sometimes. So yeah, it's a little bit of a mix, but as I said, mostly volunteer driven. So I'm really always pleased when people decide to come on and open up this part of their self, this part of their lives that's kind of taboo to talk about still.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And that's a great way to learn is from hearing other people's experiences and stories. So that's fantastic. 2 questions I have to finish up with. So since you provide your services primarily through universities, if we have someone listening who cannot access your expertise and your teaching through their institution, how can they advocate for their dean or, to consider engaging you?
Thank you so much for asking that. Let's see. Mostly my university hosts are in professional development kind of areas. So that would be the right kind of person to work with. Usually at the graduate school level, I work a lot with graduate schools or medical schools, not so much with, I should say, medical schools that offer PhDs, not so much with individual departments, although that does happen sometimes. So one kind of person to approach would be a professional development type person. It's always great when you have a group of people, not just a single person say, hey, we really want to learn more about this. And, here's a particular resource. That would be me. Thank you very much. And so, offering that to that person as a group or individually from separate people would be great. Another great group to approach is the Graduate Student Government or Graduate Student Association. Sometimes they don't have a great deal of discretionary funding, but if they do, then they could be able to host an event with me or purchase a set of tax workshops, for example. So I have a lot of clients from the student-driven side of things as well. And then kind of same thing on the postdoc side, right? Like the postdoc offices or the postdoc associations are great people to approach about that. But yeah, I would say just, request it, send them my website. I have pages on there that explain kind of the different, speaking things that I offer, the different workshops. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm not going to ask you to give financial advice because that's your day job. But I do want another kind of advice. I wonder if you'd be willing to give it. So pivoting back to the career question, you were in graduate school. You took a turn to a very interesting and compelling area that you're very passionate about. What's your advice to our listeners who are maybe themselves in graduate schools or early in postdoc and they're, thinking about what else they could be doing? What's your advice to them?
Yes. The advice is try things. Don't get so overly spending too much time at the bench or at your primary, research area. Of course, you want to put in sufficient time. You want to do your 40 hours, 45, whatever it is. But don't get so carried away with that you forget that there are other areas of your life that need to flourish as well. And one of those is preparing for your future career, which could be in research, but is frankly very unlikely to be in academia, at least in the long term. And so I would just say try things. So like for me, my example, what I was trying was blogging. And that gave me some feedback. I mean, I wasn't making money from that, but it was giving me some feedback about what other people, wanted and needed. And so some of the things you can try is like, getting an internship. It doesn't have to be like an official, summer internship you do full time, although that is possible in many fields. It could be a part-time internship that you do, a few hours a week. It could be freelancing on the side. I'm mentioning things that you're probably going to get paid to do, but it's certainly okay to do volunteer work as well to just get some experience outside of the academy, see how workplaces operate, see what people are interested in outside of your immediate context of, your lab or the research that you're doing. So yeah, just try some things and do it all through your PhD, all through your postdoc. Don't leave this for just the last year when you're trying to transition out.
Emily, thank you so much for all your advice and all that you do for our biomedical early career scientists.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Now it's time for a segment we call Your Turn, because it's a chance for our listeners to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk, or anything that you found inspirational or amusing or interesting. You can send these to us at ncicc@nih.gov. You record a voice memo and send it along. We may just play it on an upcoming episode. Now I'd like to invite our guests to take their turn. Let's start with you, Dr. Zhang.
Yeah, so my favorite book is a book called Life is About Giving Up.
Okay.
It's a book written by a very famous a Buddhist or monk in China called the Master Nebula. It's a Buddhist book telling the importance of learning to give up in your life. Because for many important things in your life, if you want to achieve more, you need to give up a lot at the very beginning. However, the most important thing is to decide when to give up and when not to give up. This is a very hard thing in the life. So this whole book is about how to adjust your expectation of the life, how to accept failures, and give up smartly to avoid wasting more resources in your life. And eventually, I think after reading the book, I become much happier in front of lots of frustrations. And I think actually giving up will only somehow make your life much better and maybe gaining more in the long run. So this is why I recommend the book about the life is giving up.
Thank you very much. That sounds like a really good read. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And how about your recommendation, Emily, Dr. Roberts?
My recommendation is a book I read in about the past year that really shook me. And it's kind of a personal finance book, but it's kind of a life book. And it's called Die with Zero. The author is Bill Perkins. And one of the main concepts that he teaches is that as you exit different phases of your life, the you that existed in that phase dies. So we have a high school you, that person is dead and gone. We have a college you, that person is dead and gone. The grad school you, et cetera, et cetera. So the basic idea behind this is to encourage you to have experiences in the phase of life that you're in and not either, put them off too much for the future or think that they're, just basically match the experiences that you want to have to the phase of life that you're in. And so now that I'm I have a couple of kids, I'm in a certain phase of life right now. I'm in the little kid phase of life. And the grad school me is gone. And so there are some things that I wish I had done during graduate school, some opportunities I wish I'd taken, and some I'm really glad that I took. And so just realize that you are, whatever phase you're in right now, it's a special phase of life. It's not going to be around forever. And please do, pursue the opportunities that you have that are unique to that phase while you have the chance to do so.
That's great recommendation. Good advice. Thank you very much. And I'd like to make a recommendation as well. It's for the stand-up comic Tig Notaro, and specifically her set from about 8 years ago when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. This original set is just remarkable in its candor and in her descriptions of the experience of receiving a diagnosis, and just her ability to digest this very difficult time in her life and see the humor in it and bring it to an audience. We'll post a link to the recording. And I have to say that since then, she's continued to shed light on this topic and related issues. She's pursued her goals in life, and she shares much of her journey in documentaries and on social media and YouTube and other places. So you can find all that online. I have to say, I find her work always helps me regain perspective and strength. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are always welcome. And you're invited to take your turn to make a recommendation that we can share with our listeners. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones and Astrid Masfar and edited by Jeanette Gozer. A special thanks to Lakshmi Grama and Sabrina Islam Rahman. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month when new episodes can be found wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from the National Cancer Institute, and I look forward to sharing your stories here on Inside Cancer Careers. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, email us at nci.info@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.